UK major update. After Home Office's rule change, students react. She had already paid the tuition deposit. She had already given notice to her landlord back home. She had her CAS number, her biometric appointment confirmation, and a folder on her laptop labeled UK Plan that she had been building for 2 years. And then her phone buzzed with a message from her university's International Student Office. Not an acceptance update, not a visa approval, a warning. The Home Office had moved, quietly, quickly, and without the kind of public announcement that would have given her time to adjust. A rule change that immigration compliance officers had tracked, flagged, and been trying to explain to panicked students ever since. This did not unfold over a semester. It unfolded in days. Days that could invalidate a visa application already in progress. Days that could strip a student of the right to bring a dependent spouse or child into the United Kingdom. Days that could force a choice between the degree and the family. One assumption here, one belief that the rules you read 6 months ago are the rules still in effect today, and everything you planned could collapse before your first lecture. What the Home Office implemented crossed a threshold that international student advocates had been warning about for over a year. And when that threshold was crossed, universities, legal advisors, and students themselves did not sit in silence. They responded with urgency, with public statements, and with a wave of first-hand accounts that is still spreading across every international student forum and social media platform connected to UK higher education. Most people in this position do one thing. They assume their offer letter protects them. They assume their university will handle it. That assumption is exactly the trap. Today, you are going to understand what actually changed, what it means for you specifically, and what you need to do before your situation becomes unrecoverable. For several months now, there had been signals, not from official Home Office press releases, not from formal government consultations with universities, just signals that the UK government was preparing something structurally significant for the international student visa system. The Home Office has been restrictive in its approach to student migration, yes, but also deliberate in that approach. Its actions had followed a pattern, a phased tightening, a graduated pressure, almost a managed reduction strategy targeting the overall international student numbers that had made headlines in the UK's net migration statistics. But what triggered serious alarm inside university compliance departments this cycle was that the pattern suddenly accelerated in a direction that affected students who were already mid-process. Immigration advisors who monitor Tier 4 and student visa policy changes recognized the indicators. The quiet amendment of the student route guidance on the UKVI website without a corresponding policy statement. The updated sponsor guidance issued to universities with changes embedded inside lengthy compliance documents rather than highlighted in summary bulletins. The shift in the rules around dependent visa eligibility that moved beyond postgraduate research students and extended into new territory. The sudden restriction on course switching and its implications for CAS issuance timelines. And when the Home Office makes multiple simultaneous changes without a unified public communication, the impact lands unevenly, hardest on the students who are least connected to real-time compliance monitoring. In the early weeks of the current term cycle, universities across the United Kingdom began identifying what compliance officers described as a materially altered visa landscape, including restriction language around student dependence and course-level eligibility that had not appeared in this form in recent student route policy history. These are changes the Home Office only implements when signaling something specific. A structural intent to reduce the volume of international students entering through the student visa route. A recalibration of which qualification levels justify the right to bring family members. Or a tightening of the English language and financial requirements that quietly raises the practical barrier to entry beyond what the headline numbers suggest. Observers weren't certain which rationale was primary, or whether all three were operating simultaneously under a single policy umbrella. But one thing was unmistakably clear. The Home Office was changing its posture on international student migration, and when that shift happens mid-cycle, after students have already committed financially and logistically to a UK education, the consequences are not abstract. They are immediate, personal, and in many cases, irreversible without significant cost. The rule change issued by the Home Office in this cycle was not a routine administrative update. It was not the kind of minor guidance clarification that universities process without notifying students. It was a substantive policy shift with direct implications for visa eligibility, dependent rights, and the practical experience of studying in the United Kingdom. Immigration advisors, after emergency briefings, described the move as sweeping in its scope, deliberately timed in its implementation window, and most importantly, asymmetric in its impact, meaning students who had already entered the application pipeline faced a different set of rules than the ones under which they originally made their enrollment decision. But policy only achieves its intended effect if the affected population absorbs it quietly. Students did not. Their response was among the most publicly visible and globally amplified reactions to a UK immigration policy change seen in the international student community in recent years. University international offices confirmed that student advocacy groups launched organized response campaigns targeting the specific provisions of the Home Office's updated student route guidance, including the dependent visa restrictions that had recently been extended in ways that analysts believe was designed to suppress the secondary migration numbers that had been driving political pressure on the net migration headline figure. They acted before the full impact of the changes could be normalized. They targeted the dependent eligibility clause that now excludes students below postgraduate research level from bringing family members. They targeted the sponsor compliance requirements that create new pressure on universities to report student activity and attendance in ways that feel more surveilling than educational. They targeted the financial maintenance threshold increases connected to the updated affordability assessment that UKVI uses to evaluate visa applications. This was not a social media reaction. It was a coordinated, documented pushback that has reached parliamentary level and is informing ongoing debates about the UK's international education strategy. And that is what made the Home Office's rule change so operationally significant for every student currently planning, applying, or enrolled. Let me explain the dependent restriction in plain terms, because this is the change that has caused the sharpest and most immediate pain. Under the rules that applied through most of recent years, international students enrolled in postgraduate taught programs, meaning master's degrees and equivalent qualifications, had the right to bring their spouse or partner and their children to the UK as dependents on the student visa. That right has been removed. The current rules restrict the student visa dependent route to students enrolled in postgraduate research programs, PhDs, research master's degrees, and equivalent research track qualifications, and to students enrolled under government-sponsored scholarship programs that specifically authorize dependent access. A student enrolled in a one-year master's program, an LLM, an MBA, an MSc, cannot bring their spouse, cannot bring their child, must either leave their family for the duration of the degree or make a choice that no educational institution should require of its students. The Home Office's stated rationale is that this change targets abuse of the dependent route by people who use student-dependent visas as a secondary migration pathway rather than a genuine family accompaniment mechanism. But the consequence of that targeting falls entirely on students who have genuine family situations and who enrolled in good faith under a different set of rules. I want to address the English language requirement changes because these have been less publicly discussed but carry equally significant practical implications. The minimum English language scores required for the student visa have been recalibrated in ways that affect which test results UKVI will accept and which score thresholds are considered sufficient. IELTS, TOEFL, and approved alternatives each have specific accepted score structures under the student route. The updated guidance has tightened how universities are permitted to assess alternative evidence of English proficiency, meaning students from certain educational backgrounds who previously might have relied on institutional exemptions or in-country assessment now face more rigid external test requirements. This affects students from countries where English medium secondary education is standard, but where the specific test score documentation required by the new rules was not part of the original planning. It affects students who sat tests under previous score requirement benchmarks and whose results may no longer satisfy the updated threshold, even though their English ability has not changed. And it affects the timeline of the entire application process, because obtaining a new test score and having it verified adds weeks to a process that already has tight KS issuance and visa application windows. The financial maintenance requirement is the third leg of this updated policy framework, and it deserves direct attention. UKVI requires student visa applicants to demonstrate that they have sufficient funds to cover their tuition and living costs for the duration of their study period. The maintenance threshold, the minimum amount you must hold in your bank account for a consecutive period before your visa application, has been increased. For students studying in London, the required maintenance amount per month of study is higher than for students studying outside London. For students who have been planning their visa applications based on the figures published in earlier versions of the guidance, the increased threshold may mean that funds they believed were sufficient are now below the required level. This is not a situation where you can simply submit the application and explain the discrepancy in a cover letter. UKVI applies the maintenance requirement as a binary. You meet it or you don't. An application that falls below the financial threshold is refused. A refusal creates a record, and a refusal record complicates every subsequent visa application you make, not just for the UK, but in many cases for other immigration systems that ask about prior refusals. I want to speak to the students who are already in the UK on their current student visa, because the rule change also has implications for people who are mid-enrollment, not just those who haven't yet arrived. If you are currently enrolled and your visa is valid, you are not immediately affected by most of the new restrictions in the sense that your existing visa status is not retroactively invalidated. But if you are approaching a point where you need to extend your visa, to complete your thesis, to repeat a year, or to transition into a new program, the extension application will be evaluated under the current rules, not the rules that applied when you originally applied. That means if your original program was a taught master's and you brought your spouse as a dependent under the old rules, your spouse's visa is linked to your permission to remain. When your visa expires, their permission expires. And if you extend your student visa, they can no longer extend as a dependent unless you have moved into a qualifying research program. This is a structural trap for families who entered the UK together in good faith and are now facing a rule change that they had no reasonable ability to anticipate or plan around. There is a harder conversation that this policy moment demands, and I am going to have it. The United Kingdom has been one of the world's top destinations for international students for decades. Universities like Oxford, Cambridge, LSE, Imperial, UCL, Edinburgh, Manchester, and dozens of others carry global reputations that attract the most qualified students from every country in the world. Those students bring tuition revenue that subsidizes research, infrastructure, and the overall financial health of institutions that the UK government simultaneously expects to compete at a world-class level while reducing the student populations that fund that competition. The Home Office's restrictions are driven by a political commitment to reduce net migration numbers. But international students are not long-term settlers in the statistical majority. Most international students leave when their visa expires, including them in net migration calculations in a way that drives restrictive policy is a political choice, not an economic or social necessity. And the consequences of that choice are landing on individual human beings, students who chose the UK, who invested in the UK, who in many cases came to the UK because British education represents something specific and valuable to them and their families. The student reactions emerging across every international forum right now are not just complaints about inconvenience. They are expressions of a broken trust between an educational system that markets itself globally and a government that changes the rules after the commitment has been made. If you are currently planning a UK student visa application, here is what you need to verify before you take any further steps. Confirm the current dependent eligibility rules as they apply to your specific qualification level. Do not rely on information from your university's website that was published more than 3 months ago. Contact your university's International Student Advisory Service directly and ask specifically about the dependent route restrictions under the current student route guidance. Confirm the current maintenance threshold for your study location and calculate whether your available funds meet the requirement under the updated figures. If you are submitting a new CAS request from your university, verify that the CAS reflects the updated guidance compliance requirements and that your university sponsor has not had any recent compliance issues that could affect their Tier 4 sponsor status. And if any part of your situation has changed since you received your original offer, your program level, your entry date, your dependent circumstances, contact an OASC registered immigration advisor before submitting your application. As this policy cycle continues, more reactions will emerge from students, universities, and parliamentary voices about what the Home Office's rule change is actually achieving versus what it was designed to address. The political pressure on net migration numbers has not disappeared. Further restrictions on the student route remain possible before the end of this government's stated policy timeline. But one thing is already clear. Knowing this right now does not make you a troublemaker. It does not make you someone who is trying to game the system. It makes you someone who is taking their future seriously enough to understand the rules before the rules take them by surprise. It means your application is built on current information. It means your family's plan accounts for what the rules actually say today, not what they said when you first started researching. Share this video with every international student you know who is planning to study in the United Kingdom. Share it with their families. Share it with anyone who is mid-application and has not yet verified that their plan accounts for the current Home Office guidance. It might be the most important thing you send them before their visa appointment. Subscribe to Visa Status Radar for more protection. We protect you with real information as the next phase of this policy cycle unfolds.